What is the most messed up thing you have ever seen at your school? It was so bad, the offender went to juvie, and our class went to court as witnesses. There was a sub-teacher for a week as our form teacher sprained his foot. He was a teacher so strict that he didn't want to be called by his last name like Mr. Johnson. He forced us to call him Sir and said he was our drill sergeant. He expected us to be perfect in every subject. To this day, I still don't understand how he didn't lose his voice from the excessive shouting. But one time, while someone was trying to talk something out with the teacher, some kid stood up and shouted at the teacher like he does all the time. The teacher came to him and stood very, very close to his face. He talked very aggressively to his face and he spit everywhere while talking. He said something along the lines of, "You think you're the king?" Next thing we knew, he pulled out brass knuckles and threatened to knock out his jaw. The teacher knocked over his table and shouted until his table shook, literally. The student did indeed punch him in the stomach, but he slapped him real hard. I knew this wasn't a normal teacher, that he was going to be fired. And then something happened that no matter how much we try, can never get out of our heads. The student pointed a Glock at his face. A Glock! At his face! I had no idea how the heck he snuck both brass knuckles and a freaking Glock in the school. We just heard shouting and screaming for 2 minutes until he pulled out the gun. That was when the teacher finally stopped behaving like he is a king and us being the slaves. The next day, the entire school staff and our class are in the court. The student was sentenced to a year in juvenile, and for the teacher, he was fired and banned from the education board. Never received any charges at all. But to be honest, I think it was pretty shocking that a student would even dare stand up to a teacher that is probably 10 times stricter than your typical Indian father. He's my steam friend now. Wow, this story is wilder than a roller coaster ride. A substitute teacher so strict he wants to be called Sir, like a drill sergeant. A student standing up to him with brass knuckles and a Glock. And now the OP is friends on Steam. Talk about a plot twist. Happened to me. Essentially, I have a serious medical condition that causes tumors to grow anywhere in and on the body, and freshman year this one teacher just had it out for me from the start. Because of my medical condition, I had an IEP because I would have multiple surgeries to remove the tumors. Because of this, she knew what condition I had. Every day in class, she would give me crap. She told all of my classmates about my condition, and they would join in on the fun. To the point where someone drew a crude drawing of me on the whiteboard, and she left it there for days, meaning other students in different periods now knew too. She verbally harassed me over it, let other students verbally harass me over it. She watched another student who sat behind me use a locker lock to lock my right foot, where I have what they call a plexiform fibroma, which is a huge clump of tumor cells between the loop of my shoe and the metal of the underside of the desk, and she threw a book at my head. The worst part was, this was in the 90s, and nobody believed a teacher could ever behave that way, including the principal, the superintendent, and my parents. So I did the only thing I could. I took an old mini tape recorder to class and waited, and it only took a day for the fun to happen. When she was done doing her thing, I hit stop and tore into her and got suspended. I also decked the piece of crap who locked my foot to the desk a few days prior on my way out the door and broke his nose. When I got home, I played the tape. My parents felt horrible for not believing me, and we were at the school within the hour with lawyers. Let's just say I wasn't suspended anymore, and the teacher wasn't there anymore either. On a side note, when the mother of the guy I punched found out what he did, she was pretty pissed and embarrassed at him for messing with a disabled kid, so I somehow didn't get in trouble for that. This story is absolutely outrageous. A teacher who bullies a student because of their medical condition and gets other students involved too? Unbelievable. But thankfully, this student took matters into their own hands and recorded the evidence. And can we talk about the guy who locked their foot to the desk? What a jerk! I'm glad justice was served and the teacher was removed. We need to take bullying seriously, no matter who the perpetrator is. When I was a senior, I went to one of the trashiest schools in my state. Some real redneck pride kind of stuff. There were 2 freshmen, total a-holes, but they were tough, apparently. I remember it was the day before homecoming. They lured one of the special education kids into the boys' restroom and barricaded the door. They proceeded to beat the ever-living crap out of this kid and take pictures of each other, forcing a barely conscious far-spectrum autistic kid to fillet them. This part I didn't see, of course. What I witnessed was after school. I got benched in football for smoking weed, so the coach made me help coach the freshmen so I wouldn't feel left out or useless. The freshmen practiced on a different field that had a great view of the parking lot. The victim had already been taken away, and the 2 other kids were being questioned at the school. This was probably an hour after school let out. An officer came out with one of the attackers and was walking him across the pavilion. From the other side, another person, a huge dude, got out of their car and started walking towards the officer and then to one of the attackers. When they finally crossed paths, the huge guy got one hit at the kid, knocking him down immediately. Then he dropped another massive punch to his head while the kid was flat against the concrete. Turned out the big guy was the autistic kid's dad, and nobody ever saw the one attacker again. There were a couple rumors spreading. Some said the kid was killed by the second punch, and other people were saying that the impact scrambled his brains. The other attacker, I couldn't tell you. Nobody cared enough about him to start any rumors or spread any news. Whoa, okay, guys, I don't even know where to begin with this one. I mean, on one hand, we have an extreme case of bullying, and on the other hand, we have a father who took justice into his own hands. I'm not here to condone violence, but you can't help but feel for the father who had to witness his son being taken advantage of by a couple of a-holes. I don't care if they are kids, man. I mean, what kind of sick people do something like that? I'm not saying what the father did was right, but you have to admit there's a part of you that's like, well, they had it coming. Back when I was in middle school in a pretty nice area, one of my fellow semi-nerds, let's call him Tommy, decided he would break full-time into the cool kids clique, and his plan to do it was to become a bully. His chosen target was Mikey, the quiet special needs kid with cerebral palsy. So Tommy goes up to Mikey and starts picking on him to start a fight. Well, Mikey took his pretty hefty textbook and smacked Tommy right upside the head. Tommy went down and proceeded to get beat. I can't even remember what happened to Tommy afterwards. He went from being just one of the normal kids that sometimes hung out with us nerds and sometimes hung out with the cool kids to being a complete social pariah. Because even in the dog-eat-dog world of the early 90s schoolyard, the one rule everybody lived by was you don't pick on the special needs kids. Wow, just wow. This story has it all. A nerd trying to fit in with the cool kids, a bully getting what he deserves, and a special needs kid coming out on top. I'm not saying violence is the answer, but I gotta give it to Mikey for defending himself. And let's be real, Tommy got what was coming to him for trying to pick on someone who couldn't defend themselves. I can't believe we still live in a world where children are brought up thinking it's okay to emotionally damage other kids, and especially choosing to pick on disabled kids. What a sick world, man. My teacher's 5-year-old son, Jacob, sometimes came to his mom's lessons and sat in her lap while she was teaching, waiting to go home with mom. He was a blonde, kind, incredibly sweet little guy, and sometimes he played games on his iPad. Everybody loved him. They lived right across the road from our school. They also had a cat who would often walk around the school premises. Jacob also had 3 older brothers that attended the school, so everyone around the school knew the family well. Our school is relatively small, and it's located in a small rural town, so little kids are playing around all the time on their own, so there's really nothing bad that could happen. One afternoon, while Jacob was waiting for his mom to finish some work in school, he decided to drive around with his bike. He had a friend along with him. It was February, so it was a mixture of ice and mud all around. And as the ice is melting all around, there's a minor flood. When he was riding his bike, he accidentally steered off the road. It was muddy and he slid into a ditch. He drowned. The ditch was filled with water due to the flood, and it was closer to a river than a rivulet. When he fell in the ice-cold river, he obviously was frightened and shocked. The stream carried him through a culvert, which carried him to the pond on the other side. But the pond was covered in ice. He was stuck under the ice. His friend unfortunately ran away. But soon a person living nearby saw Jacob in the pond and called the emergency services. When they arrived, they attempted to revive him for 3 hours straight. His mother, our teacher, suffered a heart attack when she found out what had happened and was hospitalized herself. We were all expecting her and the family to move completely because she was living and working right next to the place her poor boy died. Hell, she sees that ditch every time she goes to work or goes on a walk. Her children see the ditch their brother drowned in every time they go to the playground. Needless to say, it's horrific. We were all wrong. She returned to school after barely a week, looking as good as always, dressed in stylish clothes as always. Our class gave her an awkward group hug and nobody said a single word. Nobody knew what to say. She continued work like nothing ever happened. That was 2 years ago. Since then, she's missed one day of work. It was Jacob's 6th birthday. Still, every time I go to school, I hope she hasn't hurt herself. I search for any signs of the incomprehensible pain she's feeling every day, but there's nothing there. It seems like everyone has forgotten the tragic event, and it's utterly terrifying. Wow, that is such a heartbreaking story. I can't even imagine what the mother and family went through. It's amazing that the mother was able to come back to work so soon after the tragedy. It's a testament to her strength and resilience. It's important to remember that just because someone looks okay on the outside doesn't mean they aren't struggling on the inside. My heart goes out to the family, and I hope they are finding ways to cope and heal. I went to a high school in Manhattan. It was like the 3rd day of 10th grade, and people were saying how this other nearby school was going to jump people from our school once school let out. So school let out, and all I saw were hundreds of students, 200 to 300 students, coming at each other. Now, the issue was, our school had metal detectors, their school did not. So the students from my school had no weapons while the students from the other school did. So I saw one student with a gun. I saw another with a cane, and he was thrashing the cane around, hitting anyone and everyone around him. I saw lots of knives and switchblades. I saw a pregnant girl get stabbed in the stomach. Her and the baby survived, thankfully. But man, it was so surreal I couldn't believe it. Even the police were saying it was too chaotic and that they were not getting involved. They literally said, if y'all don't want to get hurt, then y'all need to leave because we are not helping anyone. Other than that, there was one other thing. Our school didn't allow any electronics. A nearby bodega profited off of this by charging $1 to hold phones. Students could drop off their phone at the bodega and then pick it up after school. One day they claimed to have misplaced a few phones. Needless to say, people were pissed. So, in retaliation, they raided the bodega. This was like maybe a 75-student operation. They were taking everything from them. They were taking the candy display boxes, bringing them outside and throwing them up in the air, letting candy fly everywhere. They basically ransacked and destroyed the bodega. Oh my God, what kind of high school is this? Students getting jumped with weapons and pregnant girls getting stabbed? And the police didn't even want to get involved? That's insane. But really, it's not funny when people's property is destroyed and lives are put at risk. It's just crazy to think that things like this can happen in a place that's supposed to be safe for learning. A kid at our school died once while out on a school camp. They were way out in the Australian outback. The teachers made barbecue for the kids, and one of the boys, for some reason, ate the food, kebabs, without asking what was in them, even though his parents had filled out his permission form, indicating clearly that he had food allergies. Long story short, hardcore anaphylaxis. The school nurse stabbed him with every single EpiPen they had in the medical kit. Nothing. Nada. Zip. They picked him up, threw him in the van, and sped out of the campsite at top speed down the road. They were so far out in the middle of nowhere that there's no phone reception, so we can't really do anything. Can't call for an ambulance, helicopter, nothing. Finally, they got to the nearest town and called emergency services. The helicopter arrived, loaded the kid onto it, started treatment, and flew straight back to town. The kid never made it. He was dead before the chopper landed. I was working at the school at the time. I had a job offered by the school to graduates, which I accepted, and found out all the details from the school nurse. Thanks for watching till the end, and don't forget to subscribe and like for more of these ridiculous stories. Love you all, and stay safe out there in that crazy world. Much love. Peace.